I'm Monty, 28 years old, from Minneapolis, and my entire life, I've lived in my brother Travis's shadow. He was the golden boy who landed a full-ride scholarship to Stanford worth $300,000. Then he threw it all away, over weed. My parents mortgaged their house and drained their retirement to bail him out, yet they still call him their investment while treating my accounting career like a consolation prize. But karma has a way of catching up, and Travis learned that the hard way. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with an entitled golden child in your family. Growing up in a middle-class suburb just outside Minneapolis wasn't bad on paper. We had a decent 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools. My parents both worked stable jobs, dad as a high school physics teacher, and mom as a dental hygienist. We never went hungry. Always had clean clothes and took a modest vacation each summer. By all accounts, it should have been a perfectly balanced childhood. But there was always an invisible scale in our house, and it perpetually tipped in my brother's favor. Travis was 3 years older than me. And from the moment he started bringing home perfect report cards in elementary school, he became the sun around which our family orbited. By the time I was 7 and Travis was 10, the pattern was already set in stone. He was the valedictorian in training the Little League All-Star, and later the high school football quarterback, who could somehow also captain the debate team and play cello in the orchestra. I wasn't a bad student or athlete by any measure. I maintained a solid B+ average, played second base on the baseball team, and had a decent group of friends. But in the Lambert household, being decent wasn't enough when your brother was exceptional. Why can't you apply yourself? Like Travis became the soundtrack of my adolescence, playing on repeat whenever I brought home a B in advanced algebra or struck out during a baseball game. The disparities were both subtle and glaring. My parents never missed a single one of Travis's football games, debate tournaments, or orchestra performances. They'd arrive early wearing custom shirts with his jersey number, armed with video cameras, and enough enthusiasm to power the entire stadium. For my baseball games, they'd often arrive late, stay distracted on their phones, checking Travis's college admissions portal, or miss them entirely because Travis had a more important event. When Travis needed new football cleats, he got top-of-the-line models. When I needed baseball equipment, I inherited Travis's old gear, or got the budget version. His walls were decorated with trophies, medals, and ribbons. Mine had a single participant medal from a 5th grade science fair, and a most improved certificate from baseball camp. Our family photo albums told the story more clearly than words ever could. Travis front and center at his high school graduation, hoisting trophies, giving speeches. I was the half smile in the background, the afterthought, the, "Oh, Monty's there too." The Christmas of Travis's 16th birthday stands out like a neon sign in my memory. We gathered around our fake tree with its mismatched ornaments the same way we did every year. Travis opened his gift, a small box that contained keys to a used but decent Honda Civic, parked outside with a giant red bow. My parents beamed as he shouted, and ran outside to inspect his new ride. When it was my turn, I unwrapped 3 pairs of socks, some generic brand jeans, and a $50 gift card to the local mall. "You'll get a car when you're 16 too," Mom promised. 3 years later, when I turned 16, I received driving lessons and permission to occasionally use Mom's car if I paid for gas. For a while, I tried everything to get their attention. I joined the same clubs as Travis. I tried out for football, despite being built for baseball. I even took up the violin briefly, thinking musical talent might be the key to their approval. Nothing worked. Travis was simply better at everything, or at least that's how my parents saw it. What made it all worse was Travis's dual personality. In front of our parents, he was humble, gracious, and supportive. "Monty's really getting better at math," he'd say, patting my shoulder in a display of brotherly encouragement. But the moment they left the room, the mask would drop. "Don't bother trying so hard," he'd tell me. "You'll never catch up anyway." There was one science project in 8th grade that I'd worked on for weeks. A complex demonstration of electromagnetic principles that my physics teacher father would surely appreciate. I built it entirely on my own, staying up late to perfect every detail. The night before it was due, Travis saw it and grew quiet. The next evening at dinner, he casually mentioned a little side project he'd been working on about electromagnets. Dad's eyes lit up and he spent the entire meal discussing the principles with Travis, who kept shooting me knowing looks. My project remained unmentioned in my room, and I never brought it up. These experiences shaped me in ways I couldn't recognize until much later. While Travis expected things to be handed to him, I learned to work twice as hard for half the recognition. While he relied on our parents' constant support, I developed independence and resilience. When he could charm his way through situations, I learned to prove myself through consistent results. By senior year of high school, I'd stopped trying to compete with Travis's ghost. He was already at Stanford by then, and I had found my own path. Despite my parents pushing me toward impressive fields like medicine or law paths they thought might finally put me in Travis's league, I discovered I had a natural aptitude for numbers and systems. Accounting wasn't glamorous, but something about the precision, the balance, the order of it appealed to me. When I announced my intention to major in accounting at State University, which had offered me a modest merit scholarship, my parents exchanged that look I knew too well. "Accounting is practical," Mom said, her voice trailing off. "Travis says the business school at Stanford has an amazing finance program," Dad added. "Maybe you should aim higher." But for once, I stood firm. I'd found something that made sense to me, something I could excel at on my own terms. Little did I know that decision would set us on dramatically different paths. One that would eventually force my family to reconsider everything they thought they knew about their golden boy and their afterthought second son. When Travis's acceptance package arrived from Stanford, you would have thought our family had won the lottery. Mom actually screamed, the kind of high-pitched, unrestrained sound I'd never heard from her before. Dad popped a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion, apparently. They called everyone: grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, Dad's colleagues, Mom's boss, and even the cashier at our local grocery store who'd once commented on Travis's good manners. The Stanford full-ride scholarship was worth nearly $300,000, a figure my parents repeated so often, it became a mantra in our house. The validation was complete. Travis wasn't just exceptional in our family's eyes. One of the most prestigious universities in the country had stamped its approval on him with a price tag equivalent to a small house. 3 months later, when my acceptance letter came from State University with a $10,000 merit scholarship, Mom patted my shoulder and said, "That's nice, honey." Dad nodded approvingly and added, "State has a solid accounting program. No champagne, no phone calls. Just a notation on the family calendar that we needed to buy dorm stuff in August." The contrast continued as we prepared for college. Travis's dorm preparation was an expedition that spanned 2 months and multiple credit cards. He needed the premium bedding set, a new MacBook Pro wireless noise-canceling headphones, a mini fridge, a custom desk lamp, and an entirely new wardrobe that would help him fit in at Stanford. My parents spent over $3,000 setting him up. For my college preparation, Mom handed me a box of Travis's discarded dorm supplies and said, "See what you can use from these." I got his old desk lamp with a flickering bulb sheets that had already been washed 100 times and towels with the Stanford logo that Travis had deemed not cool enough. I worked overtime shifts at the hardware store that summer to buy myself a basic laptop. The financial disparity wasn't just about material things. It set the tone for our entire college experiences. Travis called home regularly not to check in, but to request additional funds for networking events, parties, academic supplements, spring break trips, and professional wardrobe necessities, designer clothes. Each request was met with immediate transfers to his account. Meanwhile, I was working 30 hours a week at a campus bookstore and as a weekend math tutor while carrying a full course load of accounting classes. I'd come back to my shared dorm room at 11 at night, exhausted only to face another 3 hours of studying advanced tax theory or auditing principles. My roommate Blake, who was on his 3rd major in 2 years and whose parents fully funded his education, couldn't understand why I never joined him for Thursday night bar crawls. "Dude, you're missing the whole college experience," he'd say, stumbling in at 3 in the morning while I was finishing a practice balance sheet. "Some of us are here for the education," I'd reply, too tired to explain that my college experience was fundamentally different from his. Travis, meanwhile, was living the Stanford dream, at least according to his Instagram. He joined one of the most elite fraternities on campus, surrounded himself with the children of tech executives and politicians, and spent his weekends at beach houses in Malibu or skiing in Tahoe. Every photo showed him tan, smiling, carefree, living a life that looked like a brochure for the perfect college experience. Back home, my parents had transformed the living room into a shrine to Travis's achievements. New Stanford pennants hung on the wall, alongside framed photos of Travis in front of landmarks on campus. When their friends visited, the conversation inevitably turned to our son at Stanford, as if I had ceased to exist entirely. If I was mentioned at all, it was as an afterthought. Oh, and Monty's doing well at State, too. I developed a tight-knit group of friends who were in similar situations, working students who understood the value of time and money because they had so little of either to spare. We studied together, split textbook costs, and covered each other's shifts when emergencies came up. They became the support system I never had at home. Occasionally, Travis would grace State University with his presence when he was home for breaks. He'd show up unannounced at my dorm room or the bookstore where I worked, designer sunglasses perched on his head reeking of expensive cologne. "This place isn't bad," he'd say, looking around with the benevolent approval of a king surveying a peasant village. Quaint, even. During one of these visits, during sophomore year, he spotted my accounting textbooks and laughed. "Still playing with calculators, huh? I'm taking this amazing entrepreneurship seminar with a guy who founded 3 unicorn startups. He says accounting is for people who help make money, not people who make money." I wanted to point out that he wasn't making any money, he was spending our parents' money, but I bit my tongue. These interactions always left me with a complicated mix of emotions: resentment at his condescension, a jealousy of his opportunities, but also a growing sense that I was developing something he wasn't: self-reliance. It was during my junior year that I met Rachel in a required economics class. She was a nursing student working night shifts at the university hospital while maintaining a near-perfect GPA. The first time I saw her studiousness, her quiet determination, I recognized a kindred spirit. Unlike others who viewed my constant working as strange or sad, Rachel understood it. When I told her about my family situation over coffee after a study session, she didn't offer pity. "Sounds like you're building something real," she said. "Something that can't be taken away from you." Those words stuck with me, especially as we started dating, and I began to see myself through her eyes rather than through the comparative lens of Travis's achievements. What none of us knew then was that Travis's golden Stanford experience was already beginning to tarnish around the edges. His calls home became less frequent. His social media posts showed more parties and fewer classes. When Mom would ask about his grades during their weekly calls, he'd smoothly change the subject to some impressive connection he'd made or exciting opportunity on the horizon. Mom and Dad never pressed him for details. His word had always been gospel in our house. I learned later that his GPA had slipped below the minimum required to maintain his scholarship during sophomore year. But he'd managed to talk his way into academic probation rather than immediate loss of funding. That was Travis's special talent. He could charm his way out of almost any situation. Almost. Travis's junior year at Stanford marked the beginning of his downfall, though none of us recognized it at the time. His Instagram posts, once carefully curated to show him studying in picturesque campus locations or networking with successful alumni, began to feature more parties, more red cups, more glazed eyes, and fewer books. At first the change was subtle, a slightly disheveled appearance here, a missed family call there, nothing that raised serious alarms. During one of our rare phone conversations, usually initiated by me, Travis brushed off my questions about his classes with vague assurances. "College isn't just about grades, Monty," he said, his words slightly slurred despite it being a Tuesday afternoon. "It's about connections, experiences, building your network. That's what separates Stanford from, well, places like State." What I didn't know then was that Travis had discovered 2 things simultaneously: the profitable market for marijuana on campus and his own affinity for the product. It started innocently enough, picking up extra weed for his fraternity brothers when making his own purchases. Then he realized he could buy in bulk from his supplier and mark up the price when redistributing to his wealthy peers. Before long, he had a regular side business selling to his fraternity and their social circle. These privileged kids with trust funds thought nothing of paying premium prices for convenience, and Travis was happy to provide that service while skimming enough off the top to fund his increasingly expensive lifestyle. Why ask our parents for spending money when he could make hundreds of dollars a week with minimal effort? For several months, this arrangement worked perfectly. Travis maintained enough academic performance to stay above water. His popularity soared as the go-to guy for party supplies, and the extra cash allowed him to keep up with his trust fund friends without constantly calling home for money. The bubble burst on a rainy Friday night in October. The fraternity was hosting a small gathering that, like most college parties, expanded beyond its intended size. Someone called a noise complaint. Campus police arrived expecting to find underage drinking a routine situation they might have handled with warnings. Instead, they discovered Travis in his room with over 4 ounces of marijuana neatly packaged in individual baggies alongside a scale and several $100s in cash. The evidence of intent to distribute was undeniable. Stanford has a notoriously strict drug policy, and Travis's scholarship had specific morality clauses. Within hours, he was in custody, his student status suspended pending a university disciplinary hearing. I'll never forget the 3 a.m. phone call that changed everything. I wasn't even the one who received it, but my roommate woke me up saying my mother had been calling the dorm phone repeatedly because she couldn't reach me on my cell, which I'd silenced while studying late prost. When I called home, Mom was hysterical. "Travis has been arrested. Your father and I are flying to California first thing in the morning. Can you check on the house while we're gone?" I was in the middle of finals week with 3 exams and a major project due, but this detail seemed irrelevant to them. Travis was in trouble and nothing else mattered. They left without even asking about my studies or considering that I might need their support during this critical academic period. The aftermath unfolded in a series of increasingly bad news. The attorney my parents hired for Travis charged $50,000 money they didn't have and had to secure by taking out a home equity line of credit. The university disciplinary committee was unmoved by Travis's tearful explanation that he was just helping friends and voted unanimously to expel him and revoke his scholarship. Worst of all, because he was expelled mid-semester, Stanford demanded repayment for that term's tuition and housing another $35,000 that my parents had to somehow produce. The criminal charges were eventually reduced to a misdemeanor through the expensive attorney's connections, but the academic consequences were irreversible. Travis's Stanford career was over, along with the prestigious scholarship that had been my parents' pride and joy for nearly 3 years. When they finally returned home with Travis in tow, I was shocked by his attitude. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the financial bomb he'd dropped on our family. Instead, he complained bitterly about the unfair system and how his fraternity brothers had abandoned him. "They act like selling a little weed is this horrible crime," he ranted during his first dinner back home. "Half the professors probably smoke it themselves. It's legal in California now anyway." "Not for distribution," I pointed out quietly. "And not on a college campus." Travis glared at me. "What would you know about it? State University probably doesn't even have real drug policies because no one there can afford anything beyond cheap beer." Mom jumped in to soothe him. "It's all right, honey. What matters is you're home now, and we'll figure out the next steps. We always do." Dad nodded reassuringly. "Everyone deserves a second chance. We'll get you back on track." I sat there stunned, picking at my food, while they comforted the architect of his own destruction. Earlier that same week, I'd received news that I'd made the dean's list again and secured a prestigious internship for the summer at a regional accounting firm. I'd mentioned it during a brief call home, and Mom had said, "That's nice, dear," before returning to fretting about Travis's situation. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with Travis's complaints echoing through the wall, I experienced a confusing jumble of emotions. There was anger certainly at Travis for his recklessness, and at my parents for their blind devotion. There was a twisted sense of vindication the golden boy had finally stumbled, but there was also genuine concern about what this meant for our family's financial future. My parents weren't wealthy, and I knew enough about finance to understand that they had just taken on dangerous levels of debt to salvage Travis's mistakes. I also felt something unexpected pity. For all his advantages, all the support and praise and second chances, Travis had never developed the character or resilience to handle adversity. He'd never had to. And now, facing consequences for perhaps the first time in his life, he seemed completely unprepared to accept responsibility or adapt to changed circumstances. What I couldn't have known then was that this incident, painful as it was, represented only the beginning of Travis's downward spiral and the beginning of a long, difficult journey that would eventually force my parents to confront the true nature of their golden boy and the real value of their overlooked second son. The financial avalanche triggered by Travis's expulsion quickly buried our family in debt. Within weeks of his return home, my parents took out a second mortgage on the house they'd almost paid off. The purpose to fund Travis's enrollment at Westridge, a private college known more for its lenient admission standards than its academic rigor. The tuition was nearly $40,000 per year less than Stanford, but still a crushing burden for a high school teacher and dental hygienist, already saddled with legal bills and repayments to Stanford. "It's an investment in Travis's future," Dad explained when I questioned the wisdom of taking on more debt. "He needs to finish his degree at a good school to get back on track." I graduated that spring with my accounting degree maintaining honors status despite my heavy work schedule. My graduation ceremony fell on the same day as Travis's first meeting with his academic advisor at Westridge. Guess which event my parents attended? I received a text message with, "So proud of you," and a promise to celebrate when they returned. That celebration ended up being a hurried dinner at Applebee's 2 weeks later, during which my father spent most of the time on the phone dealing with some crisis in Travis's financial aid paperwork. I'd secured a solid position at Henderson, accounting a respected firm in Minneapolis. The starting salary wasn't spectacular, but it offered stability and growth potential. When I shared the news, Mom said, "That's a good backup plan until something better comes along." As if a real career with benefits and advancement opportunities was somehow less valuable than Travis's third attempt at completing a semester of college. That attempt failed spectacularly. By December, Travis had flunked out of Westridge, having attended approximately half of his classes and completed even fewer assignments. The $40,000 vanished with nothing to show for it, except an official letter recommending that Travis consider alternative educational paths. Did this give my parents pause? Make them reconsider their approach? Of course not. Instead, they withdrew money from their retirement accounts, incurring substantial penalties to fund Travis's next brilliant idea, a tech startup. Travis had decided he was an entrepreneur now. He'd come up with an app idea, a vague concept for social networking, but with privacy, that already existed in multiple forms and needed seed capital to develop it. Despite having no technical skills, business experience, or even a completed undergraduate education, he convinced our parents that this venture would make them millions. "Think of it as an investment," Travis said, using the magic word that seemed to open our parents' wallets. Facebook started in a dorm room, and now Zuckerberg is worth billions. Travis has always had vision, Mom told me when I tried to point out the lunacy of draining retirement savings for this scheme. "You've always been the practical one, Monty." Which is wonderful in its own way. But Travis sees possibilities the rest of us don't. The startup lasted about 3 months before the money ran out. Travis had rented an expensive co-working space, purchased top-of-the-line equipment, and hired a developer who disappeared after receiving an advance payment. When the venture inevitably collapsed, Travis already had another idea ready, importing specialty foods from Europe. This pattern continued for the next 2 years. Travis would discover a new passion, convince our parents it was his true calling, secure funding through their increasing financial sacrifices, and then abandon the project when it required actual sustained effort. Through it all, they continued to believe in his potential, while viewing my steady career advancement as somehow less impressive. By this point, my parents' financial situation had become precarious. They were juggling multiple high-interest loans, had depleted their retirement savings, and were increasingly falling behind on their mortgage payments. Yet they still found ways to support Travis's lifestyle, paying his rent, covering his car insurance, providing a monthly stipend for basic expenses. Meanwhile, I had been promoted twice at Henderson, had started building my own client list, and was saving for a down payment on a condo. I'd also been dating Rachel steadily since college. She had completed her nursing degree and secured a position at Minneapolis General Hospital. When my parents began hinting about needing loans to cover their mortgage payments, I felt torn. On one hand, I had the means to help them and didn't want to see them lose their home. On the other hand, I knew any money I provided would likely end up subsidizing Travis's latest scheme, rather than actually solving their financial problems. During a particularly uncomfortable Sunday dinner at their house, the truth came out in the open. Travis had just walked us through his latest venture, an online personalized fitness coaching service. Despite having no qualifications in fitness or nutrition, when I raised questions about licensing and liability, Mom jumped to his defense. Travis has always been athletic. Remember how he was the football star? This is a natural extension of his talents. It's an investment in his future, Dad added, using the phrase that had become a reflexive justification. That's what you said about the tech startup, the import business, the food truck idea, and the podcast network, I pointed out. How many investments are you going to make before admitting they're just subsidies for Travis to avoid real responsibility? A tense silence fell over the table. Then Travis laughed dismissively. Not everyone wants to spend their life crunching numbers in a cubicle, Monte. Some of us are building something bigger. What exactly have you built so far? I asked. Besides debt for our parents. Mom gasped. Monty, that's a terrible thing to say to your brother. Travis is finding his path. He's 30 years old, Mom. When does this finding his path phase end? Dad stepped in with the final blow. Monty, you've always been jealous of your brother's ambition. Just because you settled for a safe career doesn't mean Travis should limit himself. I looked at Rachel, who had witnessed the whole exchange with wide eyes. She squeezed my hand under the table, a silent message of support. We should go, I said, quietly standing up. Thank you for dinner. In the car, Rachel finally spoke. Your parents really don't see it, do they? They don't see what they're doing to themselves, to Travis, or to you. They never have, I replied. And I'm starting to think they never will. That night I made a difficult decision. I would not loan money to my parents as long as they continued enabling Travis. It wasn't spite or revenge. It was the realization that helping them financially would make me complicit in a destructive cycle. Instead, I offered to help them create a budget and financial plan to address their mounting debt. They declined, saying I didn't understand the complexities of their situation. 2 weeks later, Travis convinced them to co-sign the lease for a luxury apartment he couldn't possibly afford on his non-existent income. When I tried to have a serious conversation with them about the financial reality they were facing, possible bankruptcy loss of their home and destitute retirement, they became defensive. You've always been good with money, Monty, but you don't understand investment potential, Dad explained condescendingly. Sometimes you have to take risks for big rewards. What evidence do you have that Travis will ever provide those rewards? I asked. What has he actually accomplished in the last 5 years? He would have graduated from Stanford if not for one mistake, Mom said, still clinging to the alternate reality where Travis's potential was just waiting to be fulfilled. One mistake he made because he was selling drugs, I reminded them. And he's made nothing but mistakes since then. You're being cruel, Mom said tearfully. Travis is sensitive. He needs our support, not criticism. And what about me? I finally asked. Have you ever thought that I might need your support too? The look of genuine confusion on their faces told me everything I needed to know. The idea that I might need or deserve support had simply never occurred to them. After that conversation, I began creating more distance between myself and my family. I still called weekly to check in, still showed up for major holidays, but I protected myself emotionally and financially from their dysfunction. It was painful but necessary for my own well-being and for my relationship with Rachel, who deserved a partner not constantly drained by family drama. As I pulled back Travis's grip on, our parents only tightened. Each new scheme was more grandiose. Each failure blamed on external factors rather than his own lack of follow-through. And through it all, my parents continued to mortgage their future on the fantasy that their golden boy would someday justify their blind faith in his potential. By the time I turned 26, my career had accelerated beyond my initial expectations. Henderson Accounting had promoted me to senior accountant, placing me in charge of several major client accounts. My reputation for meticulous attention to detail and ability to clearly explain complex tax matters to clients had earned me recognition within the firm and a substantial salary increase. With careful saving and Rachel's steady income as a nurse, we had accumulated enough for a down payment on a modest but charming 3-bedroom house in a good neighborhood. The day we closed on the house, I called my parents to share the news. Mom's first response was, "That's wonderful, honey. Did you hear? Travis has an interview with that marketing firm downtown. It could be his big break." The contrast between our trajectories couldn't have been more stark. While I was building a stable career and life with Rachel, Travis had been evicted from his luxury apartment which our parents had co-signed for after failing to pay rent for 3 months straight. He had moved back into my parents' basement where he spent most days sleeping until noon and nights playing video games or going out with friends who seemed to rotate based on who was still willing to pick up his bar tab. Rachel and I got engaged that fall after 4 years together. We planned a simple but meaningful ceremony, saving most of our budget for our future, rather than a single day of celebration. When we announced the engagement at a family dinner, my parents offered polite congratulations before excitedly sharing that Travis had a promising lead on a sports management opportunity, which turned out to be an unpaid internship that he never actually applied for. Travis managed to secure employment for 6 weeks at a friend's father's insurance agency. He showed up late most days and called in sick at least once a week. The final straw came when he arrived visibly high for a meeting with important clients. He was fired on the spot, but when recounting the story to our parents, he claimed he'd left because the company lacked vision and couldn't recognize talent. Meanwhile, I had begun laying the groundwork for my own accounting practice. While maintaining my position at Henderson, I started taking on a few private clients on weekends, small businesses that needed affordable accounting services. Rachel supported this side hustle, understanding that the long-term goal was to eventually establish my own firm. We lived frugally, saved aggressively, and planned carefully, a stark contrast to Travis's impulse-driven existence. My business grew steadily through referrals. Small business owners appreciated my straightforward approach and reasonable rates. After a year of moonlighting, I had enough clients to consider making the leap to full-time self-employment. I developed a business plan, secured a small business loan which I qualified for based on my excellent credit and solid business model, and rented a small office space. The opening of Monty Lambert Accounting Services coincided with Travis's latest crisis. My parents discovered $40 missing from Mom's wallet, then another $60 from Dad's desk drawer. When confronted, Travis initially denied taking the money, then admitted he'd borrowed it to meet some friends but really meant to pay it back. The friends, it turned out, were his drug dealer and drinking buddies. My parents' response: Travis is going through a difficult phase. He needs our understanding, not judgment. Their enabling reached new heights when Travis received a prestigious local business award, the Rising Entrepreneur Under 30 recognition from the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce. The ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, and my parents promised to attend. That same morning, Travis was arrested for driving under the influence after wrapping his car paid for by our parents around a telephone pole. No one was hurt, but Travis's blood alcohol level was nearly twice the legal limit. Instead of attending my award ceremony, my parents spent the evening at the police station bailing Travis out and arranging for an attorney using money they had set aside for long overdue repairs to their aging roof. When I called to ask where they were, Mom sounded frazzled and distracted. "Oh, Monty, I'm so sorry, Travis had an emergency. We'll make it up to you, I promise." Rachel attended the ceremony with me, applauding loudly when my name was called. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered as I returned to our table with the award. "And I'm sorry your parents missed this." The pattern continued as Rachel and I prepared for our wedding. Travis's latest crisis always took precedence over our milestone events. Our engagement party was overshadowed by Travis's court date for the DUI. Our wedding planning weekend was interrupted by frantic calls because Travis had disappeared for 3 days after an argument about his growing credit card debt, which our parents were paying. Thanksgiving that year became the breaking point. Rachel was 4 months pregnant with our first child, and we'd planned to announce the news to both families over dinner. My parents had insisted on hosting despite their financial struggles, and Rachel's parents had flown in from Colorado for the occasion. Travis showed up an hour late, disheveled and clearly intoxicated. He interrupted conversations, made inappropriate comments to Rachel's younger sister, and eventually knocked over a glass of red wine onto Rachel's mother's cream-colored dress. When Dad gently suggested that Travis might want to slow down on the alcohol, he erupted. "Everyone in this family thinks they're so perfect, Monte, with his boring accounting business and his perfect wife and his perfect life. You all just want me to be a drone like him." My father tried to calm him. "Son, no one is saying that. We just want you to find your path." My path. My path. Travis laughed bitterly. My path was Stanford, until they screwed me over for a little weed. My path was ruined by a system designed to keep real entrepreneurs down. I'd had enough. Years of resentment, concern, and frustration boiled over. Your path was ruined by you, Travis. No one else. You had every advantage, every opportunity, every second chance, and you squandered all of it. And our parents have nearly bankrupted themselves trying to fund your potential while ignoring the actual success right in front of them. The room fell silent. Rachel's parents looked uncomfortable. My mother began to cry. Monty, how can you be so cruel to your brother? She asked. He's struggling. He's been struggling for 7 years, Mom. At what point do we acknowledge that his struggles are self-created and self-perpetuated? At what point do we stop sacrificing everything? Your retirement, your home equity, your peace of mind for someone who gives nothing back. Travis stormed out, slamming the door behind him. My father gave me a disappointed look that I'd seen countless times growing up. You've always been hard on your brother, Monty. Not everyone finds their way as easily as you did. I stared at him in disbelief. Easily, I worked 30 hours a week throughout college. I built my business while working full-time. I saved for years to buy our house. Nothing about my success was easy or handed to me. In fact, I did it all without the support you've endlessly given Travis. That's not fair, Mom protested weakly. What's not fair is that you missed my college graduation for Travis's orientation at a school he flunked out of. What's not fair is that you missed my business award ceremony to bail Travis out of jail. What's not fair is that you've mortgaged your entire future on Travis's empty promises while treating my actual achievements as afterthoughts. Rachel placed her hand on my arm, a gentle reminder to calm down. I took a deep breath. We came here today to tell you that Rachel is pregnant. You're going to be grandparents in 5 months. But right now, I'm not sure what role you'll play in my child's life if you can't recognize this destructive pattern. My mother's tears turned to sobs. My father sat stunned. Rachel's parents, to their credit, managed to gracefully suggest that perhaps we should continue the dinner another time. As we prepared to leave, my father finally spoke. Monty, we love you. We've always loved you. We just don't worry about you because you've always been fine. That word fine summed up their perception of me perfectly. Not exceptional, not requiring attention or investment, just fine. It was both a compliment to my self-sufficiency and a painful acknowledgement of how little they'd felt I needed them. As Rachel and I drove home in silence, I realized that the confrontation, painful as it was, had been necessary. The question was whether it would change anything. Whether my parents could finally see the reality of their golden boy and the true cost of their unwavering devotion to him. The months following our Thanksgiving confrontation brought significant changes to our family dynamic. Rachel and I maintained limited contact with my parents, agreeing to meet occasionally for coffee in neutral locations. These meetings were awkward but civil, with my parents making stilted inquiries about the pregnancy and my business, while carefully avoiding any mention of Travis. What we didn't know was that Travis's behavior had escalated dramatically behind the scenes. His recreational drug use had evolved into a more serious dependency. His drinking had increased. And most dangerously, he had discovered that his parents' financial resources, while not unlimited, could still be accessed in ways they never anticipated. The first sign of real trouble came when my mother called me in tears one February morning. Someone broke into the house and took your grandmother's jewelry, she sobbed. The police think it might be someone who knew where things were kept. I felt a sickening certainty about who that someone might be, but I kept my suspicions to myself. 2 weeks later, Dad called to report that his collection of rare coins, a hobby he'd maintained for decades, had mysteriously disappeared from his study. The strange thing is, there's no sign of forced entry, he said, confusion evident in his voice. Again, I said nothing. It wasn't my place to accuse Travis without evidence, and my parents would likely reject the suggestion anyway. But when my mother's prized silver service, a wedding gift from her own mother, vanished next, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Travis had begun pawning family heirlooms to fund his increasingly expensive habits. When confronted by our parents, he expressed shock and outrage at their accusations, gaslighting them so effectively that my mother ended up apologizing to him for the suggestion. By this point, I had established firm boundaries. I refused to attend any family event where Travis would be present, explaining to my parents that his unpredictable behavior was a stress I didn't need with a baby on the way. Rachel, now in her 3rd trimester, fully supported this decision. My parents were hurt but grudgingly accepted the new arrangement, though they continued to press for family healing and forgiveness. "He's still your brother," Mom would remind me during our coffee meetings. "Family is forever." "Family shouldn't steal from family," I would respond. "Family shouldn't consistently put other family members at risk." The situation reached a breaking point when my father received a call from First National Bank regarding unusual activity on their accounts. Someone had attempted to take out a large cash advance on a credit card they didn't recognize. When my father explained that he hadn't applied for any new credit cards recently, the bank's fraud department began an investigation. What they discovered was shocking even to me, who had long ago lost any illusions about Travis. He had been systematically opening credit cards and loans in our parents' names, using their personal information. He had forged my father's signature on loan documents, created online banking profiles to divert statements to email addresses they couldn't access, and effectively stolen their identities to finance his lifestyle. The total damage was nearly $80,000 across 6 different fraudulent accounts. My parents' credit was ruined. They were facing potential foreclosure on their home, due to the 2nd and now 3rd mortgages they couldn't pay. And Travis, when finally confronted with irrefutable evidence from the bank's fraud department, simply disappeared. He left a note on the kitchen table. "Need some space to figure things out. Back soon." He took my father's newest car, purchased on credit of course, and vanished. 3 days later, my parents finally called me, their voices small and broken. They needed help understanding their financial situation and legal options. For the first time in my life, they were turning to me not as an afterthought, but as their only hope. I arranged to meet them at their house the following day. What I found shocked me. My once proud parents looked physically diminished, as if they had aged 10 years in a matter of months. The house was cluttered and neglected. Bills were piled unopened on the dining room table. My mother, who had always kept an immaculate home, seemed not to notice or care about the disarray. "We don't know what to do, Monty," my father admitted, his voice lacking its usual confidence. We trusted him. I spent the entire day sorting through their financial documents, creating a comprehensive picture of their situation. It was even worse than I had feared. Beyond the fraudulent accounts Travis had opened, they had maxed out their own credit cards, drained their remaining retirement funds, and fallen 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. They were on the brink of financial collapse. "I'll help you create a plan," I promised, setting aside my long-held resentments in the face of their genuine distress. "But you need to make a decision about Travis. The identity theft and fraud are crimes. Serious ones. He's our son," my mother whispered. "Yes, and he stole from you repeatedly and deliberately. He knew exactly what he was doing." My father looked at my mother, then back at me. What would happen if we reported him? Before I could answer, my mother's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. When she answered hesitantly, her face drained of color. "Yes, this is Mrs. Lambert," she said faintly. "Travis is my son." It was the police department from a city 300 miles away. Travis had been arrested not for the fraud against my parents, but for attempting the same scheme with multiple other victims. He had been creating fake identities and credit accounts, using information stolen from former employers, acquaintances, and even strangers whose mail he had intercepted. He was facing multiple felony charges across 2 states. And now the police were calling to inform my parents that they had evidence suggesting Travis had also victimized them. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations, police interviews, and financial triage. I helped my parents find an affordable attorney who specialized in identity theft cases. I worked with them to contact all the creditors and begin the arduous process of disputing the fraudulent accounts. I connected them with credit counseling services and helped them understand their options for addressing their legitimate debts. Travis, meanwhile, remained in jail, unable to make bail. When my parents finally went to see him, the meeting was devastating. Rather than showing remorse, Travis attempted to manipulate them once again, claiming he'd been framed, or that he'd only taken what was rightfully his as their son. He expected them to mortgage what little they had left to bail him out and hire an expensive attorney. For the first time in Travis's life, our parents said no. The court proceedings were painful but necessary. With evidence mounting from multiple victims and financial institutions, Travis eventually accepted a plea deal, 3 years in prison, for multiple counts of identity theft, fraud, and related charges. The sentence could have been much longer had he not agreed to the deal. Watching my parents in the courtroom as the sentence was announced was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Their golden boy, the son in whom they had invested everything, their money, their dreams, their unconditional support, stood handcuffed before a judge, finally facing consequences that no one could shield him from. As Travis was led away, he looked back at our parents with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, genuine fear. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was truly on his own. In the courthouse hallway afterward, my mother collapsed into my father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood awkwardly to the side, unsure of my place in this moment of grief. Then, to my surprise, my father extended his arm, pulling me into their embrace. "We've been such fools, Monty," he whispered. "Such blind, stubborn fools." "We never saw him clearly," my mother added through her tears. "And we never saw you clearly either. Can you ever forgive us?" I didn't have an answer then. The wounds were too deep, the history too complicated for simple forgiveness. But as I held my weeping parents in that courthouse hallway, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward understanding. On the drive home, my father broke the silence. "All these years," he said quietly, "we thought we were investing in Travis's potential. But we weren't investing at all. We were enabling his worst instincts, preventing him from ever developing the character he needed. And all while we had a son who built himself without our help," my mother added. "Who became a good man despite our neglect, not because of our support." It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had as a family, painful in its clarity but necessary for any hope of healing. As I dropped them off at their house, the house they would soon have to sell to address their debts, I realized that karma had indeed caught up with Travis. But in doing so, it had also forced a reckoning that our family had needed for decades. 1 year passed. My accounting practice continued to thrive, expanding to require 2 additional staff members. Rachel gave birth to our daughter Ellie, a bright-eyed baby with her mother's determination, and according to Rachel, my analytical gaze. Our home became the center of our world, a place of warmth, honesty, and the kind of unconditional love I'd always craved, but rarely experienced in my own childhood. My parents sold their house using the proceeds to pay off the most pressing debts Travis had created. They moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment and began the slow process of rebuilding their financial lives. With my guidance, they established a strict budget, negotiated settlements with several creditors, and even started a small emergency fund for the first time in years. The most significant change, however, wasn't financial, but emotional. Without Travis's constant crises dominating their lives, my parents discovered new aspects of themselves. Mom volunteered at a literacy program for immigrant families, finding purpose in helping others learn the language skills she'd always taken for granted. Dad started tutoring physics at a community center, reconnecting with his love of teaching outside the pressures of the school system. Travis, meanwhile, was serving his sentence at Oakdale Correctional Facility. For the first few months, his letters home continued his pattern of blame-shifting and self-pity. But gradually, something began to change. His later letters showed the first genuine reflection I'd ever witnessed from him. "I've had a lot of time to think about how I got here," he wrote in one letter my mother shared with me. "For the first time in my life, I can't charm my way out of consequences. I can't rely on Mom and Dad to fix my mistakes. It's terrifying, but maybe it's what I've needed all along." After much consideration and with Rachel's thoughtful counsel, I decided to visit Travis 6 months into his sentence. The drive to Oakdale was tense. My stomach knotted with conflicting emotions. What would I say to the brother who had been both my tormentor and, in a strange way, the architect of my resilience? The prison visiting room was stark and institutional, hard plastic chairs, fluorescent lighting guards watching from corners. Travis entered wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit thinner than I remembered, the confident swagger replaced by a cautious shuffle. For a moment, he didn't look like the golden boy or the manipulator. He just looked like a man who had lost everything. "I didn't think you'd come," he said as he sat across from me. "Neither did I admitted. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. There were no performances, no competition, no parents to impress or disappoint. Just two brothers facing the reality of their shared history and vastly different paths. "I've been jealous of you for years," Travis confessed, staring at his hands. "Not the obvious stuff, your business, your marriage. I was jealous of something I couldn't name until I got here." "What's that?" I asked. "Your foundation. The way you built yourself from nothing. I had everything handed to me, and I never developed whatever it is that makes a person solid inside." "Self-reliance," I suggested. "Character." He nodded. "Every time I messed up, someone bailed me out. Every time I failed, someone made excuses. I never had to face myself or my mistakes. You always did." "Not by choice," I reminded him. "No," he acknowledged, "but it made you stronger, while I just got emptier." It wasn't a magical reconciliation. There were too many years of hurt for that. But it was honest. Perhaps the first honest exchange we'd ever had. As I left the prison that day, I felt a strange lightness. Not forgiveness exactly, but the release that comes with finally being seen. My parents continued their own journey of self-awareness. They sold most of their possessions, keeping only what truly mattered. They learned to live within their means for perhaps the first time in their adult lives. And slowly, tentatively, they began rebuilding their relationship with me and Rachel, getting to know their granddaughter with a presence and attention they'd rarely shown me. "We want to be better grandparents than we were parents," Mom told me one evening as she cradled Ellie. "We want to see her clearly for exactly who she is." Dad nodded. "Not for who we want her to be or what we think she should accomplish. Just for herself." It was a simple statement, but profound in its acknowledgement of their past mistakes. When Travis was released after serving 2.5 years of his 3-year sentence reduced for good behavior, he faced the daunting challenge of rebuilding a life with a felony record, no recent employment history, and a reputation in tatters. After much discussion with Rachel, I offered him a job doing basic bookkeeping at my firm with clear conditions, absolute honesty, accountability for any mistakes, and a probationary period with regular performance reviews. "Why would you do this for me?" he asked, when I made the offer during his first week of freedom. "After everything I did." "I'm not doing it for you," I clarified. "I'm doing it because it's who I am. Someone who believes in earned second chances, not endless rescues." Travis started work the following Monday, arriving 30 minutes early, dressed in an inexpensive but clean suit he'd purchased at a thrift store. He approached the job with a humility I'd never seen in him before, asking questions instead of pretending to know answers, acknowledging mistakes instead of making excuses. Our parents adjusted to their new reality with surprising grace. The apartment they once viewed as a humiliating step down became a home they took pride in maintaining. They learned to derive satisfaction from paying bills on time rather than from material possessions. And most importantly, they began treating me and Travis as the adults we actually were rather than the golden boy and the afterthought of their imagination. That Thanksgiving, almost 4 years after the confrontation that had broken our family apart, we gathered at my home. Ellie, now a toddler with opinions about everything, charmed everyone with her combination of stubbornness and affection. Travis brought homemade dinner rolls, having discovered an unexpected talent for baking during his time in prison. My parents contributed side dishes prepared within their modest budget. As we sat around the table, I looked at this imperfect, wounded, healing family and felt a profound sense of peace. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because all hurts were forgotten, they weren't. But because for the first time we were seeing each other clearly, without the distorting lens of favoritism or the burden of unrealistic expectations. Travis raised his water glass. "I'd like to make a toast." We all looked at him with varying degrees of surprise. "To Monty and Rachel, for creating this home and this family, and for showing me what real success looks like, not Stanford scholarships or fancy startups, but integrity, hard work, and love that doesn't depend on performance." Mom wiped away tears. Dad cleared his throat repeatedly. And to second chances, Travis continued. Not the kind that enable a rescue, but the kind that offer a path to earn back trust and self-respect. We clinked glasses, the simple sound, marking a new chapter for all of us. Later, as we cleaned up the kitchen, my father pulled me aside. You know, Monty, I've been thinking a lot about what you said years ago about investing in Travis while ignoring your success. You were right. He looked out the window at the backyard where Travis was pushing Ellie on the small swing set Rachel and I had built. The irony is that if we'd invested a fraction of that support in you, it would have multiplied, but you succeeded anyway without our help. That says everything about your character. It wasn't easy, I admitted. I know, and I'm sorry we couldn't see it then. But I want you to know that I see it now, and I'm prouder of you than I can express. Those words, the acknowledgement and validation I'd craved for decades, meant more than I could have imagined. Not because I still needed my parents' approval to feel worthy, but because they represented a truth finally recognized that real success isn't measured in scholarships or accolades, but in the strength of character that allows a person to build something meaningful, despite obstacles. Travis continues his recovery one day at a time. He works diligently at the firm, has maintained sobriety, and is slowly rebuilding his life on a foundation of accountability rather than charm. Our relationship will never be the carefree brotherhood idealized in movies, but it has evolved into something perhaps more valuable. A mutual respect born of hard truths and harder growth. As for me, I've found that the true freedom comes not from vindication or even forgiveness, but from breaking the cycle, from creating a family where worth isn't measured in achievements, but in character where love isn't conditional on performance, and where every member is seen and valued for exactly who they are. If you've stayed with me through this long story, I hope it's offered some insight or comfort, especially if you've lived in someone's shadow or watched someone squander every advantage. Remember that the qualities forged through adversity, resilience, self-reliance, integrity, often prove more valuable than any privilege. And sometimes karma doesn't just punish the deserving, it creates the opportunity for genuine transformation. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who couldn't see harmful patterns? Drop a comment below I read, and respond to as many as I can. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth isn't determined by others' recognition of it. Sometimes the strongest people are those who built themselves without a spotlight.